The courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, its stone facade weathered but commanding respect. Reporters gathered outside, their cameras perched like vultures, waiting for a story to break. The case had captured the nation's attention, and today promised to be its most pivotal day. Inside, the air carried a nervous weight, thick with expectation, as people filed into the gallery. Each step echoed on the polished floor, bouncing off the high ceilings and landing in the silence like a warning bell dot at the very front. The judge's bench loomed, carved from oak that had witnessed decades of trials. Behind it, Judge Morrison adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the room. He was a seasoned man, known for his strict adherence to the law, but also for moments of quiet compassion. Today, however, his expression carried more gravity than usual. This was no ordinary case. The accused, a man in his late 30s, sat at the defense table. His dark suit did little to soften the hard lines of his face. His eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, occasionally settling on the jury before quickly shifting away. He had been charged with a crime that shook the community, a crime that left scars not just on victims, but on everyone who had followed the news. Whispers about his guilt rippled through the town long before the trial began. But here, in this solemn room, whispers meant nothing. Only testimony, evidence, and the truth mattered. At the opposite table, the prosecutor, a determined woman named Claire Reynolds, organized her notes with meticulous care. Every movement was purposeful. She had built her reputation on cases that seemed unwinnable, and this trial would either elevate her further or test her limits. The defense attorney, slick-haired and sharp-tongued, leaned casually in his chair. Feigning confidence he clearly did not feel, but no eyes were fixed on the lawyers or even the accused. All attention rested on the small wooden chair near the witness stand. There, perched uncomfortably with her tiny feet dangling above the floor, sat a 3-year-old girl. Her presence was both unusual and unsettling. Children were rarely brought into courtrooms, especially one this charged with tension. But she was the only eyewitness to a moment that could decide the outcome of the case. Her hair was neatly tied in pigtails, her dress carefully chosen by her mother that morning. But her eyes told another story. Wide, uncertain, and shadowed with memories too heavy for her age. They stared at the polished floor. She hadn't spoken since the night of the incident. Not a single word. Doctors had called it selective mutism, a reaction to trauma. Therapists had tried gentle games and play therapy. Her mother had tried lullabies and whispered reassurances. Nothing worked. Words, it seemed, had abandoned her. And yet here she was, the prosecution's last hope. Her mother sat close by, clutching her daughter's hand. She rubbed circles against the child's small palm, silently praying she would find strength. The gallery watched with hearts clenched tight, some shaking their heads in doubt. Could a child this young possibly hold the power to sway a courtroom? The jury leaned forward, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical. They had been instructed to weigh testimony carefully, but even they felt the strangeness of relying on a toddler in such a serious matter. One juror, a middle-aged father, studied the girl with misted eyes, as though picturing his own child in her place. Judge Morrison leaned forward. His tone softened, breaking from the formality that usually colored his voice. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. We just want to listen if you'd like to share something." The girl didn't lift her gaze. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit in her lap, its fabric worn from countless hugs. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for even the smallest sound. But only silence stretched on, so heavy that it became deafening. The prosecutor stood, her voice calm and measured. "This child," Claire Reynolds began, "is not here to be pressured. She is here because her truth matters. She witnessed something important. Whether she speaks one word or none, her presence tells us something vital about what happened that night. The defense attorney immediately rose, his voice sharp. Objection. This is nothing more than theatrics. The child hasn't spoken in months. To drag her here is cruel and irrelevant. Overruled, Judge Morrison said firmly, though his tone softened again when he looked at the girl. We will proceed carefully. The court will not rush her. The child shifted slightly, as if the voices around her were too loud. She pressed the stuffed rabbit tighter to her chest. Her mother leaned close, whispering something inaudible, but the girl remained still. The courtroom waited. Seconds turned into minutes, stretching endlessly. Someone coughed nervously in the gallery, but otherwise the room was frozen. The accused shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as he studied the girl. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. They knew that whether or not the girl spoke, this was history. A 3-year-old on the witness stand was almost unheard of, and the drama of it all was impossible to ignore. The prosecutor tried again, her voice warm, almost like a lullaby. Do you remember the puppy that was there that night? She asked gently. The girl's head tilted, ever so slightly. It was the first movement that suggested recognition. Her mother squeezed her hand with encouragement. The gallery leaned forward. But again, silence. No words. And yet, something had shifted. It was faint, but noticeable. The girl's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit loosened slightly. Her eyes flickered up, not at the prosecutor, not at the jury, but toward the courtroom doors, as if expecting someone to appear. Judge Morrison cleared his throat softly, not wanting to break the fragile moment. He glanced at the bailiff, who gave a subtle nod. Something had been arranged, something not yet revealed to the gallery or even the jury. The tension grew unbearable. People exchanged curious glances, whispering behind their hands. What was happening? Why was the little girl looking toward the doors? And then the sound of heavy paws echoed against the polished floor. The hush that settled over the courtroom was suffocating. Even the shuffle of papers ceased as all eyes fell on the tiny girl seated in the witness chair. Her feet swung gently above the polished floor, never quite touching, and her small hands clutched the stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. She looked impossibly small in a chair built for adults, as though the weight of the courtroom might swallow her whole. Her name was Emily, just 3 years old. Her entire world had been interrupted by a single terrifying night. Since then, her voice, once full of laughter and babble, had vanished. Doctors called it selective mutism, a protective silence born from trauma. Her mother called it heartbreak. And now, the entire courtroom called it doubt. The prosecutor, Claire Reynolds, knew this was risky. She had spent sleepless nights debating whether to put Emily on the stand. A child so young, so fragile. How could she be expected to carry the burden of truth in a room filled with strangers' lawyers and an accused man who represented her fear? Yet Claire believed in her. The smallest detail from Emily's lips could tilt the balance of the case. The defense attorney smirked, leaning back in his chair. He whispered something to his client, and the accused chuckled under his breath. To them, this was theater, a desperate move by the prosecution. They didn't believe a toddler could possibly hurt their case. If anything, it made the prosecution look reckless. Emily's mother sat only a few feet away, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She kept her eyes fixed on her daughter, silently willing her to be brave. For months she had watched her child retreat into silence. No more bedtime giggles. No, "I love you, Mommy," whispered in the dark. No chatter about toys or cartoons. Just quiet, painful, haunting quiet. To see her daughter here, in this courtroom, was almost unbearable. Judge Morrison leaned forward. His stern demeanor softened as he looked at the child. His voice, usually commanding, dropped to a gentle cadence. "Emily, sweetheart," he said, "you don't have to be afraid. No one here will hurt you. You don't even need to look at anyone if you don't want to. Just sit, hold your bunny, and if you feel like saying something, you can." The gallery collectively held its breath. It was rare to see a judge lower himself to a child's level, but Morrison knew the weight of the moment. His years on the bench had taught him when the law needed firmness and when it needed humanity. Emily didn't look up. Her eyes stayed, fixed on the rabbit's ear, which she rubbed between her thumb and forefinger in endless repetition. Her silence was louder than any testimony. Claire Reynolds approached slowly, crouching slightly, so her presence wasn't towering over the girl. "Emily," she said softly, her voice like a lullaby. "Do you remember the night you were with Mommy and there was a puppy there?" Emily's shoulders twitched almost imperceptibly, as though the word puppy tugged at something hidden inside her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes flicked toward the door again, quick as lightning, then back to her rabbit. Claire noticed, but she didn't push. Instead, she gently laid a picture on the table, a crayon drawing Emily had made months before, discovered during therapy. It was crude but unmistakable. A dog with floppy ears, scribbled in brown and black, next to a stick figure with tiny legs. The drawing had been their only clue that Emily remembered the K9 from that night. The gallery stirred. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. They could sense something was shifting, something subtle but important. The defense attorney rolled his eyes and muttered loud enough for the jury to hear, "We're basing justice on a child's." "Doodles now?" Claire ignored him. Her eyes stayed on Emily. "That's your puppy, isn't it? The one who was there." Emily's grip on her rabbit loosened slightly. For the first time, she lifted her head just enough for the light to catch. Her eyes, they were large and searching, filled with the kind of fear no child should carry. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. But her silence was no longer empty. It was loaded, charged, alive. The defense attorney seized the pause. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching back. "Your Honor, this is a waste of time. The child is clearly incapable of answering questions. This is exploitation, plain and simple. How can a toddler be trusted to give reliable testimony when she won't even look at the court?" "Sit down, Mr. Blake," Judge Morrison said firmly, his voice regaining its authority. "We will allow the prosecution to proceed. If the child has even one word to give, it may hold value beyond measure." The courtroom buzzed again, a low murmur of debate rippling through the gallery. Some people nodded in agreement with the defense. How could justice hinge on a 3-year-old? Others whispered about miracles, about the possibility that innocence could pierce through lies where evidence could not. Emily shifted again. Her little legs swung slightly, a nervous rhythm. She peeked sideways at her mother, whose eyes were brimming with tears. Her mother smiled through them, mouthing the words, "It's okay, baby. You're safe." The moment stretched on, heavy, fragile, like glass about to crack, and then Emily did something unexpected. She raised her tiny hand, not toward her mother, not toward the prosecutor, but toward the door again. Her finger trembled in the air, pointing as though she could see something the rest of them could not. Claire's heart raced. She turned her head toward the doors, then back to Emily. "Are you looking for someone, sweetheart?" she asked carefully. The girl didn't speak, but she didn't drop her hand either. The gallery rustled again, confusion rippling through the rows of spectators. The jurors exchanged puzzled glances. The defense attorney smirked once more, whispering loudly, "She's playing games?" But Claire knew better. She remembered Emily's therapy notes. She remembered the way the child had once drawn, not just the dog, but the way she always pointed at doors, Windows, spaces, waiting, searching. Emily wasn't pointing aimlessly. She was waiting for something. Or someone. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the judge. Judge Morrison raised his brow, a silent question. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. The moment had arrived sooner than she expected. In that stillness, the tension crackled like electricity. Everyone leaned forward. Jurors, reporters, spectators, caught in the silent drama of a child's trembling hand. And then, with a single nod from the judge, the bailiff moved toward the heavy courtroom doors. A click echoed through the chamber as the latch released. Slowly, the doors swung open. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was the steady, confident rhythm of paws against polished wood. The German shepherd entered the room. The heavy courtroom doors groaned open, and in stepped the unexpected guest. A German shepherd, tall and dignified, trotted forward with steady confidence. His fur gleamed under the courtroom lights, a mottled mix of tan and black with intelligent eyes that seemed to scan the room as though he understood its gravity. At his side walked Officer Daniels, his handler, dressed in his crisp navy uniform. Together they radiated a calm authority, but it was the dog who stole every gaze. Gasps rippled through the room. "Is that?" whispered one reporter in the gallery. "The canine from that night." Another replied, scribbling furiously in his notebook. The jury stirred, their attention sharpening. Even Judge Morrison, who had presided over countless trials, leaned back slightly, his brows furrowing with curiosity. It was highly unusual for an animal, even a trained police dog, to enter a courtroom. Yet here he was, padding across the floor with his claws clicking softly. His head held high. The accused shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering. His eyes narrowed on the dog, his fingers twitching nervously against the table. For the first time that day, the calm mask he wore began to crack. Emily's reaction, however, was immediate. The child, who had spent weeks locked in silence, sat up straighter. Her wide eyes, moments ago clouded with fear, now shimmered with recognition. The rabbit in her lap slipped from her fingers, forgotten, as her gaze followed the German shepherd. Her small hand trembled, but this time not in fear, in anticipation. "Baxter," Officer Daniels said softly, introducing the dog as though he were a respected witness himself. The shepherd sat obediently at his handler's side, tongue lolling. Slightly, ears perked. He wasn't barking, growling, or restless. He was calm, focused, as though he knew exactly why he was here. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is absurd. Bringing an animal into the courtroom. What precedent is there for this?" Judge Morrison raised a hand, silencing him. "Sit down, Mr. Blake. This canine is an officer of the law. He was present during the events in question. If his presence helps this witness feel safe, then he is welcome here." His voice softened as his eyes flicked toward Emily. "The court will allow it." The gallery buzzed louder now, half the room whispering excitedly, the other half wiping tears from their eyes at the sight of the girl finally looking alive again. Claire Reynolds, the prosecutor, watched Emily closely. For the first time since the trial began, the girl's lips twitched as though caught between memory and words. Claire crouched low, keeping her voice soothing. "Emily, do you recognize him? That's Baxter. He was there the night you were so brave." Emily blinked. Rapidly, her chest rising and falling. She glanced at her mother, then back at the shepherd. Slowly, shakily, her small hand lifted and pointed toward him. The entire courtroom leaned forward. The defense attorney scoffed loudly, though his voice cracked with unease. "She's pointing at a dog, for heaven's sake. This is nothing more than emotional manipulation." The jury, enough. Judge Morrison cut in sharply, His gavel tapped once, restoring order. "The child will continue. And you will remain silent, Mr. Blake, unless you have a legal objection worth this court's time." Blake sat back down, red-faced, though his eyes darted toward his client nervously. Emily's mother pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Had prayed for this moment for months, to see her daughter look beyond fear, to recognize something familiar, something safe. Tears blurred her vision as Emily's gaze softened, her lips parting. The prosecutor, heart hammering, asked gently, "Emily, would you like to say something to him?" For a heartbeat, the room stilled again. The accused clenched his fists under the table. Jurors barely breathed. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised like arrows ready to pierce paper. Emily's tiny voice, unused for months, finally broke the silence. 2 words, faint but clear. "Good boy." The words struck like a lightning bolt. The courtroom gasped. As one, a woman in the gallery clutched her chest. A juror wiped at his eyes. Even Judge Morrison, ever composed, blinked hard and adjusted his spectacles, as though steadying himself against the wave of emotion that surged through the chamber. Shepard's ears perked, his tail sweeping once across the polished floor. He tilted his head, watching the little girl with a gaze that radiated loyalty. Emily's mother broke down in tears, shoulders shaking as she covered her face. She had waited so long to hear her daughter speak, to hear any sound emerge from her lips, and it was for the dog who had saved them that night. Claire's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "That's right, sweetheart. He is a good boy, isn't he?" Emily nodded faintly, her hand still pointing at the shepherd. And though her words were few, the effect was profound. It wasn't just that she had spoken. It was what those words represented: recognition, memory, and a bridge between her silence and the truth. The defense attorney tried to rise again, sputtering. "This proves nothing." But the jury wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Emily, and at Baxter, and at the accused, who now sat stiff in his chair, his complexion pale, his jaw locked, because everyone in that room felt it. Something had shifted. The silence had broken, and the tide of the trial was turning. Officer Daniels rested a hand on Baxter's head, pride glimmering in his eyes. He knew his partner had a gift that went beyond scent and speed, a gift of trust, of presence, of anchoring the most vulnerable when they needed it most. Emily leaned slightly forward in her chair, her fear receding inch by inch. She whispered again, this time barely audible, but still carried in the stillness. "Baxter saved me." The room erupted. The gallery gasped louder than before. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, and one juror openly dabbed tears from her eyes. Judge Morrison raised his gavel sharply, restoring order, but even his stern expression couldn't mask the emotion welling in his eyes. In that instant, Emily had not only recognized the K9, she had placed him at the center of the truth. Defense attorney's smirk was gone, replaced by a nervous sweat. His client's composure cracked completely. And the jury? Their faces told the story. They had seen enough to know this child was not fabricating. 3 years old, silent for months. And now, because of one German shepherd, she had spoken. 2 words, a fragile voice, but more powerful than any piece of evidence so far. Good boy. The trial would never be the same again. For several seconds, no one moved. Emily's 2 simple words, "Good boy," still hung in the air like a fragile echo. It was as though the entire courtroom feared that even the smallest sound would shatter the delicate breakthrough. That had just taken place. Emily's lips trembled, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She had spoken, yes, but now every eye in the courtroom was on her. For a child who had spent months retreating into silence, the attention was overwhelming. Her little hands clenched around the armrests of the witness chair, fingers whitening as though she might retreat again into her shell. Then her gaze returned to Baxter. The German shepherd sat calmly on the polished floor. His ears perked, his steady eyes fixed on her, as though the two of them were sharing a private understanding. His tail swept once, then stilled, waiting. He did not move. He did not demand. He simply stayed, his presence like a bridge between her fear and her courage. Something in Emily softened. Her lips twitched again, and she whispered almost inaudibly, "Baxter." The dog's ears lifted, his head tilting slightly. He gave a quiet huff of breath. Not a bark, just a sound of recognition. Gasps spread through the gallery again. A reporter dropped his pen, scrambling to pick it up. One of the jurors clasped her hands tightly in her lap, blinking rapidly to keep her composure. Even the judge leaned back, visibly moved. Emily's mother broke into fresh tears, covering her face as her body shook with relief. It wasn't just the words. It was hearing her daughter speak a name, recall something with clarity, something tethered to that night. The prosecutor, Claire Reynolds, seized the moment carefully. Her voice was low, gentle, as though coaxing a frightened bird to stay on her hand. "You remember him, don't you, Emily? You remember Baxter being with you?" Emily's small chin dipped in the faintest nod. The defense attorney shot to his feet, desperate to interrupt. "Objection!" leading the witness. "This is nothing but emotional baiting." Judge Morrison's gavel cracked once. Overruled. "The witness may continue." The defense attorney sat down again, but the calm confidence he once radiated had crumbled. His client glared at him, jaw clenched, as though silently accusing him of losing control of the trial. Claire pressed on. "Emily, can you tell us what Baxter did that night?" The girl's eyes flickered nervously. For a moment, it seemed as though she might retreat into silence again. The weight of the courtroom pressed on her tiny shoulders. Her feet swung faster beneath the chair, and her bottom lip quivered. Baxter shifted slightly, his collar jingling softly. His handler, Officer Daniels, placed a reassuring hand on the dog's back. But Baxter's focus never left Emily. The child's breath steadied. Her small hand lifted from the armrest and extended toward Baxter. Her fingers wiggled slightly in invitation. A hush swept through the room. The judge hesitated. A dog crossing into the witness stand was far from standard procedure, but he quickly read the moment for what it was. He nodded once to Daniels, and Daniels gave Baxter a subtle signal. The shepherd rose and padded slowly across the floor. His paws clicked against the polished wood as he approached the witness chair. Every eye followed him. The accused stiffened, his knuckles white against the defense table. Emily's gaze never left Baxter. When the dog reached her side, Emily slid down from the chair without hesitation. The stuffed rabbit fell to the floor, abandoned. She wrapped her arms around Baxter's neck, burying her face in his fur. The gallery erupted in muffled sobs. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly moved. Even the bailiff, a stoic man who rarely flinched, turned his face away to discreetly wipe at his eyes. The prosecutor gave the judge a questioning glance. Judge Morrison sighed softly, but gestured for her to continue. Claire crouched near the witness stand, lowering herself to Emily's level. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe. Baxter is here. Can you tell us what happened when Baxter was with you?" Emily's voice was muffled in the shepherd's fur. For a long moment, it seemed she might not answer. Then, slowly, her words slipped out, soft and shaky. "He barked." The courtroom froze again. Emily lifted her face, her eyes wide, her voice clearer now. "He barked at the bad man. He didn't let him come closer." The defense attorney scrambled to his feet. "Objection. The witness is 3 years old. She doesn't understand what she's saying." The jury turned cold eyes toward him. He faltered, realizing how heartless his protest sounded in the face of such innocent testimony. Claire's heart pounded. She kept her tone even, calm. "Emily, Do you mean Baxter helped protect you? Emily nodded again, her small hand gripping Baxter's fur tightly. He barked loud. He made me not scared. Her mother sobbed openly now, pressing her hands against her mouth. The accused shifted in his chair, his face pale, his composure cracking. The jury saw it. Reporters saw it. Everyone saw it. This wasn't rehearsed testimony. This wasn't manipulation. This was a child remembering, through the anchor of a loyal dog, what had truly happened. Judge Morrison exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure. Let the record show the witness has testified to the actions of the K-9 officer on the night in question. His voice cracked only slightly. Emily hugged Baxter tighter, her small frame trembling, but her voice steadier than anyone expected. He saved me. And in that moment, every doubt about whether the child could testify evaporated. The gallery, the jury, even the judge, all of them felt the undeniable truth in her words. The courtroom had already been shaken by Emily's soft voice and the bond she displayed with Baxter. Yet everyone sensed something more lingered beneath the surface, like a storm cloud ready to break. The child was clutching the shepherd tightly. Her small fingers tangled in his thick fur, her cheek pressed against his steady shoulder. Claire Reynolds, the prosecutor, felt the weight of the moment press against her ribs. She knew she had to tread carefully. The wrong question could send Emily spiraling back into silence, undoing everything they had gained. But the right one could unravel months of lies, evasions, and manipulations that had clouded this trial. Claire crouched lower, keeping her eyes level with Emily's. Her tone was quiet, as if speaking to her own daughter. Emily, when you saw Baxter that night, and he barked at the bad man, can you remember who was there? The little girl blinked. For a heartbeat, it seemed too much. Her tiny shoulders quivered. The courtroom leaned forward, collectively, holding its breath. Then Emily's gaze shifted across the room, not to her mother, not to the prosecutor, but toward the defense table. Her hand gripped Baxter tighter. Her lips parted. The accused stiffened, his eyes widening in sudden fear. He whispered something sharp to his attorney, who shook his head frantically, gesturing for silence. But it was too late. Emily lifted her arm, her finger pointing directly at the man in the suit. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly enough for every ear in the chamber to hear. Bad man? 2 words. 2 small, trembling words from a child, who had refused to speak for months. Yet those words landed with the force of a hammer blow. The jury gasped in unison. The gallery erupted with murmurs that the bailiff immediately tried to silence. Emily's mother crumpled forward in her seat, sobbing into her hands. Even Judge Morrison closed his eyes for a long second, as if steadying himself against the emotional impact. The accused slammed a fist against the table. She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. His voice cracked, his veneer of calm shattering. The outburst only made things worse. Jurors exchanged knowing looks. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching paper in a storm of urgency. The man who had spent weeks smiling smugly, denying every accusation, suddenly looked like exactly what the girl had named him. The bad man. Claire rose slowly, never breaking eye contact with Emily. Sweetheart, she said softly, can you tell us why he's the bad man? Emily's breath hitched. She buried her face briefly into Baxter's neck before lifting her head again. Her small voice trembled but did not break. He hurt me, she whispered. He tried. But Baxter barked. The words tumbled out haltingly, like fragile beads strung together, but they were enough. Enough to bring the courtroom to tears. Enough to ignite a fire of truth no defense strategy could extinguish. The defense attorney scrambled to his feet. Objection! Objection, Your Honor! This testimony is unreliable. She's a traumatized child, influenced by... Sit down, Mr. Carver. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade. His gavel struck once, sharp and final. The witness has identified the defendant. The jury will take note. Carver sank back into his chair, his face pale, his confidence stripped. His client gripped his arm, eyes blazing with desperation. But there was no undoing it. Emily's tiny shoulders straightened, her hand still clutching Baxter's fur. For the first time in months, she wasn't just a silent child haunted by nightmares. She was a voice. A witness. Claire fought to keep her composure, her throat tight with emotion. Emily, you've been so very brave. Baxter helped you feel safe, didn't he? Emily nodded. Her eyes, still wet with tears, sparkled faintly as she whispered again, "Good boy?" The shepherd's tail swept the floor once more, as if acknowledging her courage. The room, once tense with silence, seemed to exhale collectively. Jurors dabbed at their eyes. Reporters exchanged glances of disbelief, aware they had just witnessed the defining moment of the trial. And in the gallery, strangers who had come to watch a routine proceeding sat stunned, realizing they had seen a child change the course of justice. With only 2 words, but not everyone was softened by the moment. The defendant's jaw clenched tight, his nostrils flaring as he leaned toward his attorney. His whisper was harsh, urgent. The prosecutor caught only fragments. "Fix this, shut her down." But Carver shook his head grimly. There was no shutting this down. Not anymore. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a recess," he announced, his voice steady, but his expression betraying the weight of what had just unfolded. "Court will resume in 20 minutes. The gavel fell, and the spell broke. The jurors filed out in stunned silence. Reporters rushed toward the exit, already dialing editors with frantic updates. Emily slid back into her mother's arms, exhausted but no longer silent. She clung to Baxter, who trotted beside her without complaint. His duty clear. Her mother rocked her gently, whispering through tears, "You did so well, baby." So well. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Emily leaned into her mother's embrace and whispered back, "Safe." Another word. A new one. One that carried hope. And as Baxter guided her out of the courtroom, every person left behind knew they hadn't just seen evidence. They had seen courage in its purest form. The kind of courage that could bring justice. The courtroom emptied slowly during recess, but the air still hummed with the echo of Emily's voice. Those 2 words, "bad man," clung to everyone who had heard them. Even in the hallway, jurors whispered behind guarded hands, their expressions etched with shock. Reporters huddled in corners, sending hurried updates to news desks that would soon blast headlines across the country. Inside the prosecutor's chambers, Claire Reynolds paced with her legal pad clutched tightly. She knew what had just happened was monumental. Yet she also knew the defense would fight harder than ever to discredit it. Children's testimony could be attacked as unreliable, easily manipulated. If she didn't secure supporting evidence, Emily's bravery might not be enough to carry the case. Still, Claire replayed the moment in her mind, Emily's trembling finger pointing, her voice steady despite fear. It hadn't been coached. It hadn't been rehearsed. It was raw truth, delivered with the innocence only a child could carry. And the jury had seen that. Across the hall, the defense chamber was a storm. Daniel Carver, the defense attorney, slammed his briefcase shut and cursed under his breath. His client, Richard Hall, loomed over him, red-faced and sweating. "You said the kid wouldn't talk," Holly hissed. "You said she was too broken." Carver glared back. "She hasn't said a word for months. No one expected this. And now? Now you've got a problem." Hale's fist clenched, knuckles white. "Fix it. Make her look like a liar, a stupid little girl." Carver's jaw tightened. He had defended difficult men before, but Hale's desperation carried an edge of menace. Still, the attorney knew. His job. We'll dismantle her. Cross-examination, child psychologist, anything it takes. If she falters again, the jury may doubt her. But you, he jabbed a finger at Hall, need to sit down, shut up, and stop looking guilty. Meanwhile, Judge Morrison sat in his chambers, staring out at the gray afternoon sky. The weight of decades on the bench had given him armor against theatrics, lies, and half-truths. But today felt different. The child's voice lingered in his head, cutting through every legal shield. Judges weren't supposed to let emotions sway them, but he was still human. He had a granddaughter, the same age as Emily. When she said "bad man," it wasn't just testimony. It was a cry that pierced through the gavel, through the robes, straight into the marrow. The recess ended, and court reconvened. The jurors filed back in, their eyes sharper now, more watchful of the defendant. Baxter entered beside Emily, drawing a ripple of softened smiles across the room. The girl seemed tired, but steadier, her hand never leaving the shepherd's back. Carver rose, smoothing his tie, masking his irritation. "Your Honor," he began, "the defense requests that the testimony of this witness be stricken from the record. She is a traumatized child, clearly suggestible. Her words are not evidence. They are emotional outbursts." A low murmur swept through the gallery. Claire shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness has identified the defendant under oath. Her statement is clear, and it is corroborated by the presence of the K-9 unit on the night of the incident. The defense cannot erase truth simply because it damages their case." Judge Morrison's gavel cracked once. Motion denied. "The jury will weigh the credibility of the child's testimony themselves." Carver swallowed his frustration. He had expected that ruling. But he wasn't finished. When it was time for cross-examination, Carver approached slowly, crouching slightly to appear less imposing. He forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "Hello, Emily. My name is Mr. Carver. Can I ask you a few questions?" Emily clutched Baxter tighter. Carver kept his tone syrupy. "Now, Emily, sometimes when we're scared, we might get confused. Isn't it true you were scared that night?" She nodded faintly. "And when you're scared, it's hard to remember." "Thing's exactly right, isn't it?" Emily's lips trembled. For a moment, silence filled the air, heavy with the possibility she might shut down again. Carver leaned into that gap, pressing harder. "Maybe someone told you what to say today? Maybe your mommy? Or the nice lady here?" He gestured toward Claire. "Did someone tell you to point at Mr. Hawley?" Emily buried her face into Baxter's. Fur silent. Carver smiled faintly, thinking he had won this round. But then Baxter shifted, pressing his head against the girl's arm as if urging her forward. Slowly, Emily lifted her face, her voice no louder than a whisper, yet every person in the courtroom heard it. "No one told me." She glanced at Hawley, her tiny finger rising again. "He hurt me." The silence that followed was deafening. Carver's smile collapsed. The jurors' faces hardened. Some leaned forward, their pens forgotten, their focus fixed entirely on the little girl and the man she accused. Carver cleared his throat, scrambling. "Emily, you're very brave. But are you sure? Sometimes dreams can feel real. Sometimes I'm sure." Her voice broke, but it carried certainty. Baxter stopped him. That was it. There was no way to undo those words. Carver knew pressing further would make him look like a bully. He retreated, muttering, "No further questions." Emily sagged into her mother's arms, drained but resolute. The jurors looked at her not as a confused child, but as a survivor who had found her voice. When the court adjourned for the day, the ripples of her testimony spread wider. Outside the courthouse, Reporters shouted into cameras, declaring that the trial had turned. Strangers lit candles on the courthouse steps, whispering prayers for justice. Inside, the prosecution team gathered, their eyes shining with cautious hope. "She did it," one assistant whispered. "She turned the tide." But Claire remained wary. Trials weren't won on single moments, no matter how powerful. The defense still had tools, still had experts ready to testify. And Hawley was not a man who gave up easily. Still, as she watched Emily leave with Baxter, her small hand curled in the shepherd's fur. Claire knew one thing beyond doubt. The jury had seen truth. And truth, once spoken, was impossible to silence. That night, in the quiet of her bedroom, Emily lay curled against Baxter, her small body rising and falling with tired breaths. For the first time in months, her sleep was unbroken by screams or nightmares. The shepherd kept watch, ever faithful, his golden eyes glinting in the dark, and in a holding cell miles away, Richard Hawley sat alone, replaying the moment the little girl had looked at him and spoken. Those two words still echoed in his head, louder than any gavel, heavier than any verdict. Bad man. The courtroom was tense again as proceedings resumed. Emily sat close to her mother, Baxter lying obediently at her feet, his ears perked, eyes ever watchful. The once silent child had become the heartbeat of the trial. Every whisper, every shift of her small body carried weight. Every glance at the German shepherd strengthened her courage. Outside the courtroom, reporters murmured feverishly. Cameras flashed as assistants and interns scurried to capture the unfolding drama. Social media feeds were already alive with speculation. 3-year-old speaks in court, 2 words change trial. The story had gone viral even before the jury returned to deliberation. Inside, the defense attorney, Daniel Carver, leaned over his client, Richard Hawley. Hale's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His confident demeanor had been shattered by Emily's testimony. The once smug smirk was gone. For the first time in his life, he looked small. Carver whispered urgently, "We need to introduce doubt, something tangible. There's still the matter of the physical evidence." Hale's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't care about evidence. That girl, she's dangerous. That dog, they're against me." His voice trembled, betraying the first cracks in his carefully constructed mask. Back in court, Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "We will proceed with additional testimony regarding the events of the night in question. Officer Daniels, you may approach the stand." The officer walked confidently to the witness box, Baxter following closely. Every eye in the courtroom followed the pair, sensing something crucial was about to unfold. Daniels adjusted the microphone and spoke with the calm authority that had earned him respect in countless cases. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, "I was on duty the night Emily was endangered. My partner, Baxter, located the suspect and ensured the child's safety. The dog's actions were critical in protecting Emily." He held up photographs, images of the crime scene, Baxter in position, and the moments immediately after Hawley was apprehended. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions sharpening with attention. The photographs were stark, clear, unmistakable. Emily's small hand rested lightly on Baxter's back. She glanced up at the images, recognition in her eyes. "Baxter," she whispered, "good boy." The prosecutor, Claire Reynolds, allowed herself a brief smile. This corroboration was priceless. Baxter wasn't just a witness in spirit. He had tangible proof, documented in photos, that could not be dismissed. Carver rose again, his voice carefully measured, trying to regain control. "Officer Daniels, while the dog may have been present, is it not possible that the child simply imagined danger? Couldn't she be influenced by stress?" Daniels shook his head firmly. "No, Baxter's actions were direct. The suspect was identified and prevented from causing harm. The child was never coached. Her responses are genuine. Carver's face tightened. He had no room left to maneuver. The photographs and the shepherd's live testimony in the courtroom were too compelling. Judge Morrison's eyes swept the courtroom, lingering briefly on Emily. The court recognizes the role of the K-9 unit and its critical contribution to the protection of the child. Holly shifted in his chair, unease gnawing at him. Sweat dripped down the side of his temple. Carver attempted one final strategy. He leaned forward and addressed the child directly. "Emily, are you sure? Are you certain this man hurt you? Couldn't it have been someone else?" Emily's gaze, unwavering now, shifted to Holly. Her tiny finger rose, trembling but steady. "He did it." Baxter stopped him. The courtroom erupted in murmurs once more. Carver's mouth opened, closed, and finally, he sank back into his seat. He had nothing. Holly, on the other hand, turned white as paper. His jaw clenched. Every second that passed was a nail in his defense. Outside the gallery, the press scribbled feverishly. Social media feeds were ablaze with the news. Toddler, K-9 prove crime in court. Inside, Claire Reynolds rose to summarize. "Your Honor, the child's testimony, corroborated by Officer Daniels and Baxter, is consistent with the documented events. There is no reasonable doubt remaining that the defendant endangered Emily." The jurors nodded, their pens poised, but their minds made up. The truth had been laid bare in the most extraordinary way, through a 3-year-old's courage and a K-9's unwavering loyalty. Emily's mother wiped tears from her eyes. She reached for her daughter's hand, holding it tightly. The child looked up briefly and whispered, "Safe." Even Judge Morrison, seasoned and experienced, felt a lump in his throat. He adjusted his robe and cleared his throat. "We will reconvene after lunch to hear final statements." Hale's shoulders slumped. Carver whispered urgently in his ear, but Holly no longer had the confidence to respond. His mask was fractured. The courtroom had witnessed not only the truth but the undeniable courage of a child and her dog. Baxter, sensing the tension, nuzzled Emily's hand gently. She smiled faintly, a tiny glimmer of relief on her exhausted face. In that moment, the power dynamics had shifted completely. The accused, once arrogant, was now vulnerable. The child, once silent, was now the voice of justice. And the German shepherd, loyal and steadfast, had become the anchor of truth. The ripple effect of Emily's testimony spread beyond the courtroom. News outlets buzzed, social media lit up, and public opinion leaned heavily toward justice for the child. The images of Emily clutching Baxter, her tiny face set with determination, circulated widely, becoming a symbol of courage and the bond between humans and animals. Back in the courtroom, final preparations began for the closing statements. Claire Reynolds organized her notes, her mind sharp, her voice ready. She knew this case was extraordinary, but she also knew the strength of a child's truth, backed by undeniable evidence, could overcome even the most determined defense. Hal slumped in his chair, his eyes hollow. The mask of confidence he had worn for months had crumbled. Every movement of Emily, every glance at Baxter, reminded him that the courtroom was no longer a stage for his control. It was a theater of truth. He could not escape Dot as the judge called the court to order. Emily leaned back slightly, Baxter resting his head on her lap. She whispered softly, "Good boy," her small voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. The trial was approaching its climax, and every heart in the courtroom, from the jurors to the spectators, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A child's courage, paired with a dog's unwavering loyalty, had changed everything. And in the silence that followed, one thought lingered across everyone present. Justice, when guided by truth and bravery, could not be denied. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on the judge as the final statements were readied. Emily sat close to her mother, Baxter lying quietly at her feet, his presence steady and unwavering. The child who had once been silent now held the room in her small hands, her courage radiating in every glance, every movement. Judge Morrison adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. Members of the jury, we have heard all testimony, examined all evidence, and observed the courage of a young witness whose bravery has guided this trial. It is now your duty to deliberate and return a verdict. The jurors nodded gravely. They filed out into the deliberation room, the weight of the trial heavy on their shoulders. Each step echoed in the courtroom like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until justice would be served. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered feverishly. Social media feeds buzzed with speculation, and the public waited with bated breath. Everyone wanted to know, would the child's testimony and the canine's actions be enough to tip the scales? Emily's mother held her close. "You are so brave today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You did everything right." Emily's small fingers curled around Baxter's fur. "Safe," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with undeniable relief. Claire Reynolds, the prosecutor, reviewed her notes one last time. Every detail had been meticulously presented, every piece of evidence aligned. But she knew it wasn't just legal skill that had brought them this far. It was Emily's truth, spoken through trembling words and guided by the loyal canine. At her side, the gallery sat in tense silence as the jurors returned. They filed into their seats, faces solemn, hands clasped tightly. The foreperson stood. "Your Honor, we have reached a verdict." Judge Morrison's gavel struck the podium once, echoing across the room. "Please proceed." The foreperson cleared her throat. "In the case of the state versus Richard Holley, the jury finds the defendant." She paused, and the tension became almost unbearable. The gallery leaned forward, reporters held their breath, and Emily clutched Baxter's fur tightly, her tiny body trembling with anticipation. Guilty on all counts. The room erupted. The gallery gasped, and then broke into applause. Some jurors wiped tears from their eyes. Some reporters leaned forward, pens scribbling furiously. Emily's mother sobbed openly, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "You did it, baby. You did it." Baxter's tail thumped gently on the floor, as if acknowledging the victory, the culmination of his quiet, steadfast service. Emily whispered, "Good boy," her small voice carrying more pride than fear. Hale's face drained of color. He remained seated, his hands gripping the defense table, jaw clenched. The mask of arrogance that had carried him through the trial shattered completely. For the first time, he faced the full weight of his actions, reflected in the innocence and courage of a child and the loyalty of a German shepherd. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the cheers and whispers. "The court thanks the jury for their careful consideration. The defendant will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned." Gavel strikes echoed like finality through the courtroom. Emily sat back slightly, her tiny body relaxed for the first time in months. The room's tension melted away, replaced by relief, gratitude, and awe at the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Outside the courtroom, crowds had gathered. Cameras flashed as Emily, her mother, and Baxter emerged. Reporters asked questions, but Emily's mother shielded her, whispering softly, "We're going home now. Safe." The city would remember this day for a long time. Headlines the next morning would capture the improbable story. 3-year-old and canine delivered justice in courtroom drama. Social media would celebrate the courage of the child and her loyal companion. For Emily, it was simpler than the headlines. She had found her voice, reclaimed her sense of safety, and realized she was not alone. Baxter had been more than a dog. He had been her protector, her bridge back to the world. At home that evening, Emily curled on the couch with Baxter. Her mother sat beside her, stroking her hair gently. "You were so brave, Emily. You spoke when no one else could. You helped the grown-ups see the truth." Emily's tiny hand stroked Baxter's fur. "Good boy," she whispered again to her, voice steady now, filled with pride rather than fear. Baxter rested his head in her lap, eyes glinting softly in the dim light. The bond between them was unspoken but profound. In that moment, Emily knew she was safe, protected, and understood. And somewhere far away, Richard Halley sat in a holding cell, haunted by the memory of a child's finger pointing in two simple words that had destroyed his defenses. He had underestimated the power of truth, courage, and loyalty. Weeks later, at sentencing, Emily's testimony was cited as a pivotal moment. The judge acknowledged her bravery and the unique role Baxter had played in safeguarding her. Halley received a sentence befitting his crimes, ensuring he would no longer threaten anyone. Emily's life gradually returned to normal. She played, laughed, and spoke freely again. The shadow of fear lifted. Baxter remained by her side, not just as a protector, but as a lifelong friend. The story spread across the country, inspiring countless people, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. In the quiet evenings, Emily would often sit with Baxter, whispering her gratitude, and the shepherd would respond with gentle nuzzles. Together, they had faced fear, spoken truth, and ensured justice prevailed. And the courtroom that had once been a place of tension and silence became a testament to bravery, loyalty, and the extraordinary bond between a child and her canine. Justice had been served, peace had been restored, and Emily had found her voice. The bond between the child and the dog endured, a living symbol that courage and love, no matter how small, could change the course of lives forever.